All right. I really want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend today's webinar, Environmental Light Control with Don MacGregor. My name is Kevin Casey. I am a product and workflow consultant here at Collages, and we'll be hosting the webinar along with our very special guest, Don. Don is joining us today from Vancouver, Canada, and I just want to take a second to thank Don for joining us and just see how you're doing today, Don.
110%, feeling real good. Looking forward to it.
All right, sounds good. We're definitely in for a treat here because this is one thing that Don definitely does specialize in is the light control. But before we jump into that, I just want to go over a few basic features of this webinar software you'll see on your screen. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll have a small window that looks very similar to this. If at any time you need to maximize or minimize this window, you simply click the orange arrows found here, and then you can maximize and minimize the window. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, just please make sure you are typing them into the question field found here, and I will be filtering through the questions and saving them towards the end for a Q&A session we will be doing with Don. And then I'll also be answering questions using the chat feature for questions that might not be pertaining to the exact topic. But without further ado, I am actually going to pass things on over to you, Don. So let me change the screens here, and you can take it away.
Alrighty, I've got to say you have been made a presenter. Show my screen. And now theoretically, you all should just see my name. Is that right?
Yes, everything looks good.
All right. Let me say thank you to everybody whoever out there for taking a little time this morning. Sure appreciate it. Light control for portraiture is a broad and easy thing to say people know a lot about, but in reality, it's one of the most challenging things. I often hear comments from people saying, "Oh, I know all the lighting stuff I need to know," and my eyes just roll back into my head because those are the people that probably don't know all that much. I mean, some of the most dynamic photographers that I know in this industry, and I've been behind the camera now for over 40 years, are people that study light constantly and how to use light and how light affects the structure of faces. It's an exciting journey if you really get passionate about using light and learning how to control light. Today, we're going to go through a kind of a broad spectrum of things as it relates to light. And I'd love to be able to say to you that hey, you're going to come away with all sorts of new things you can understand about light, but really the best way to really study light and light control is by attending some of the week-long workshops, that, for example, that PPA offers through their affiliate school program, where there's actually a lot of hands-on activity because you really need to experience the various tools to understand how to apply them. But here today, what we will be able to do is to see and open your eyes to a lot of the tools that you may want to explore, and I'm sure you'll get a few good ideas as well. Let's start off by talking a little bit about exposure and metering. A lot of people today are of the attitude that put the camera on P for professional and let it do all the thinking, and I want to encourage you not to go down that road. The greater understanding that you have of light and exposure, the stronger your images are going to be, the greater control that you're going to be able to exercise over the visions you have for your images. You have your in-camera meters and you have your handheld meters. I strongly encourage the use of a handheld meter, particularly if you're getting into electronic flash activities with your photographs. The electronic flash things, which we don't have a lot of time to go into today, the handheld meters give you very clearly the contribution of flash to the overall exposure, so you can make decisions about the amount of flash that you want to have in there rather than just spraying and praying, as we say down in here, where you just take a lot of photographs and do a lot of settings hoping that the photograph is going to turn out. So here we want to say the in-camera meter, great to use when your back is to the wall. For example, I use it sometimes I'm putting up a child outdoors and that little rugrat is bouncing around all the place. Do I use my in-camera meeting? Absolutely. It's the only way you can accomplish something like that. But if I have the opportunity or time to really establish control of the light in the photograph, I immediately default to a handheld meter because I know exactly what I'm going to get through the photograph. Now let's move on to exposure. It's important to understand exposure in a variety of ways. First off, the chip versus the human eye. Your human eye is an amazing tool. And let's say that you can see 100 levels of tone from a black to a white. Or I can do that kind of, it's an amazing tool. Your chip cannot, nor can film in the older days. It could not see that range of tones that the human eye can see. It can only capture or see or record, if you will, a smaller proportion of that, maybe 30 to 70. I'm just picking a number out of the air, but that's a very realistic way to look at it. It can handle maybe from 30 to 70. The papers that we print on, whether it be photographic paper or whether it be an inkjet product you're producing, they can't even handle that great of a ratio. They can probably only handle 40 to 60. So what I'm saying here is that when you go outdoors on a brilliant sunny day, you have an extreme range of tones from deep black ranges of tones to brilliant white ranges of tones. And while your eye can see detail in those areas, your cameras cannot, and the printing vehicle cannot as well. So we need to learn how to compress the range of tones that are being recorded within the capabilities of the chip. So when you go out on a brilliant sunny day and make a photograph and you look at it afterwards, you're going like, wow, my trees out there, they all look kind of black. There's no detail in any of my trees. Whereas you go out on an overcast day and make the same photograph and you start to see a lot of tones and detail in the shadows, in the midtones, and in the highlights. That's because the natural conditions of an overcast day have compressed the range of tones within the capability of the chip. Now, ratio is the next thing that I want to define in your heads, and it's a real important goal to try to achieve because it's going to add drama to photographs. I'm talking about two areas of ratio. One of them is ratio on your the whole scene, such that you have some highlights, you have some shadows, you have a sense of depth being built into the photograph, but more importantly, that we have ratio on the subject's face. Our clients have gear right now which is just as good as ours. They're buying the same cameras that we are. They're buying the same light modifiers that we are because they're being offered to them by every Tom, Dick, and Harry. So they can make a pretty darn good technical photograph. We need to establish or create photographs that they can't do, and one of the key elements is to create a lighting pattern on a subject's face where there is highlights, there's shadow, there's a three-dimensional feeling to the face. There is a flattering sense of drama to the face. The next thing I want to touch bases on here is ISO. Your cameras that you're using today are fantastic. Some of these cameras, there's the new one announced yesterday by Canon, the 1DX, I think they called it, that's going to have a range of ISO which is out of this world. It's amazing. But having said that, you need to establish what your personal exposure index is for your cameras. If I were to take 3 Canon 5D Mark IIs and put them all on a benchmark test side by side, put them all to the exact same settings, ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, and make a photograph and look at those files afterwards under a scientific way, they're all going to be different because the chips that are in those cameras are all ever so slightly different. The shutter speeds in those cameras are ever so slightly different, and the apertures are all going to be ever so slightly different. And what I'm saying is that you need to learn your gear. You need to learn and understand the capabilities of your gear and establish your own personal exposure index. And that is best done, by the way, with a hand meter, such that you know that if you set your camera at ISO 100, you know that in reality, my camera is capturing a little bit hot. Like my own personal 5D Mark II, it captures more like an ISO 125 camera. So when I'm doing my metering, and I'm using a hand meter, I'm setting my hand meter at ISO 125 and applying those manual evaluations to my camera to make my photograph. It just gives me the consistency, and that's a very important part of the process is consistency of what you're doing, and also the knowledge of that what you are doing, you are making that decision to do it, and you know what the outcome is going to be. Exposure latitude. In the film days, we knew that our film had a fair bit of latitude. We could overexpose, we could underexpose, and you know what? The lab can pull it out and give us a decent print. As we got into the digital world, there was kind of a tendency for everybody to want to say, you have to underexpose because you don't want to blow out the highlights. You want to hold detail in the highlights, for example, on a bride's dress. And that's just a real dangerous thing to do, particularly in the raw environment. The raw environment does give us a very, very wide latitude of exposure. It is said that in most of the current professional cameras, you've got roughly a 5-stop range. And if you think of our cameras and a little bit of digital, is saying that there's 256 levels of information, which is the technical number, rounded off to 250 for our simple math, then you would say that, gee, if it's a 5-stop range, 250 levels of information, then it's probably 50, 50, 50, and 50. It doesn't work like that. In reality, our cameras capture 50% of all the information they're capable of capturing in that last stop towards white. So in other words, as you're looking at this histogram here on the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you can see that it's heavily weighted to the right-hand side. It's capturing most of that information in that last stop towards white. Now, that's a really important thing to know, but 2 or 3 things come into play here. Number one, when you're using your histogram, and you really should use your histogram, you do not want to have your histogram bouncing off the right-hand wall. That's blocked up, blown out. It's bulletproof. There'll be no information there. And the same with it blowing out down on the left-hand side, or blocking up, I should say, on the left-hand side of your histogram, which is your blacks. You don't want it bouncing off the walls. You want it to be within those right and left-hand sides. Then you're recording information. But in reality, again, if most of the information is captured in that last stop towards white, 50% of it to be honest, the next stop down is half again, the next stop down is half again, the next stop down is half again. If you turn around and say, well, I'm just going to be safe and don't want to blow up my white, so I'm going to underexpose, 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 what you're ultimately doing is you're pushing the camera to capture information down in the lower range, in the shadow range, which it doesn't have a lot of efficiency to do. It's, it can do it, but it's indenting information. That's where you end up getting a lot of chrominance noise, the ugly little colorful dots all over your pixels. Whereas if you learn to expose properly and not be afraid to start to push the exposure towards the right-hand side, where the chip is very, very efficient, not bouncing off the wall, but where it's more efficient in there, you're going to have a lot more information, usable information for your photographs. Something to keep in mind when you get into scenes like this, when you're outdoors, that's where this multi-stop capability is really valuable. The histogram and the image on the upper left is the raw capture set on automatic, and you'll notice that it's bouncing right off the right-hand wall, and you look up in the sky, and that's what that is that sky, or the clouds that are, for all practical intents, blown out. But utilizing ACR or Lightroom, look at what you can do by massaging that exposure using the tools within Lightroom, and that the gradient tool, there's a variety of ones you can use, that you can pull a lot of information back in there because it is recorded in that last stop towards white. So a lot of great things you can do in the raw environment. There's 2 distinctly different ways to meter with a hand meter. One is incident, one is reflective. Your digital cameras are essentially a reflected meter reading. They're taking the meter reading off of that mirror or off of the chip environment within the camera body. It is a reflected meter metering method. Incident is what we use on the hand meters 90% of the time. And there's 2 ways to do that. There's the dome, which is the rounded white milky dome, and then there's the flat disc, which is a white milky flat disc. My personal preference is to use a flat disc. The reason for that is I want to know the amount of light coming from any specific direction. If you use the dome and you take a meter reading, it's basically mushing together light from above you, below you, from the right, from the left, and the front, and giving you kind of an average exposure for that whole scene. It's what we used to do religiously back in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s. But then the flat disc became available to us, and the real value, again, is, say you've got a main light and a fill light situation, then you can meter how much the main light is contributing to the exposure. You can meter how much the shadow area is contributing to the exposure, and make a decision on the ratio. If you've got a 3 or 4 stop difference between that main light and the fill light, guess what? It's not going to work. Your photograph is going to be a real problem, and your clients are not going to like that strong of a ratio. So then you can adjust those light outputs to ensure that the ratio is within the capabilities of your chip and is more of a flattering look. The last thing I want to talk about here is that light is accumulative. Do not forget those words. Light is accumulative. This is particularly important when you're using reflectors, and even vastly more important when you are using electronic flash. Next thing I want to briefly chat about here is establish an anchor. What is the most dominant or consistent value in our portrait photographs? Now, if you stop and think about that for a second, you realize quickly that it's the subject that is the most important and consistent value. And then I push the end question a little further and say, if it's the subject in your photograph that is the most important consistent value, what part of the subject? Answer clearly is the face. And then push the question a little further and say, what is the most important consistent value in a face in our portraits? And you have a choice between the highlight side or the shadow side. In the old days, we used to expose for the shadows and print for the highlights. It doesn't work quite that today. The most consistent and important value in our portrait photographs today is the highlight side of the face. We want to see rich skin tones. We want to see saturated color that looks healthy and vibrant. The shadows sometimes are very dark and moody. Sometimes they're very light and airy, as in a high-key photograph. But the main light that's coming to expose the face is consistent. We want to see good information in that area. So I base all my exposures, particularly with a handheld meter, on the main light that's coming in to illuminate the mask of the face. If I point my meter at my main light, it says a 30 to 5.6. I set my camera at 30 to 5.6. When you start to learn to expose with in a consistent way using this technique, you will quickly, and I mean quickly, learn to control your shadows so that you have the ratio that is a pleasing vision for your photographs. A couple of key points. Number one, look for control of the ratio between subjects and background. You want to have information that's really believable and beautiful on their subjects, but you also want to have information in your background that gives it a sense of depth. If you've got, take your subject and put them in the open shade and the background is a blown out mountain scene, you're going to have no information back there. It's not going to be a particularly strong photograph. The next thing to pay attention to is create lighting on subjects to flatter the subjects, to show the shape and structure of their faces by using highlights and shadows. It's what our clients can't do, and we have to elevate our photographs well above what they can do if we want to get paid well for them. You're going to have to learn to use reflectors, flash, and modifiers for both those tools. Generally speaking, your background should not really be more than 2 to 3 stops brighter or darker, or you risk blowing out and losing the perception of depths. That's where raw files, again, can be so powerful in working through this concept. Look at these 3 photographs in this image right in here. Notice that we've got highlights, we've got shadows. If you were to try to recreate any one of these photographs in a studio situation, you would need a minimum of 5 studio lights. You need a background light, a hair light, a kicker, a main, and a fill light. Every one of these photographs has those elements there, yet these 3 photographs are created outdoors using absolutely no reflectors or flash guns or anything, just utilizing the raw, natural light outdoors. And what I want to share with you for the next few minutes here is how to find some of these lighting situations where you can see this 3-dimensional feeling to your photographs. And this is ultimately your goal, remember, to create this 3-dimensional feeling. More examples of it. Look at the photograph in the upper left. This is actually in a big open rotunda kind of a thing in a seminar I was teaching in Mexico. Big window lights coming in, but we've got information foreground, middle ground, and general information in the background. The girl laying on the stairs, foreground information, middle ground meaning her, and we've got lots of background information. Yet the ratio of light on her face is very, very pleasing. It's soft and it's wrapping around her face. There's a highlight side and a shadow side. The image of a photographer friend of mine from Idaho down here, Mike Ridinger, we got beautiful information on the foreground, middle ground, and background. There's lots of depth to the scene. Yet look at the lighting pattern on his face as he's sitting on his motorcycle. Highlights and shadows. There's a lot of drama there. It's not just flatly lit. You want to have some sense of dimension to the subjects. Some of the principles of environmental light control. Number one, light comes from every direction when you're going outdoors. If you go into your camera room, all the lights are off. If you want a main light, you push a button, turn the dial. If you want a fill light, push a button, turn the dial. If you want a background light, push a button, turn the dial. But outdoors, it's exactly the opposite. All the lights are already on, and you've got a very limited ability to change them. You certainly don't have buttons to turn them on and off or turn the power on and off. You have to find tools outdoors to subtract, or if you are doing additive, meaning a reflector or flash, to add to control the situation. Light also outdoors has many colors. If you look at the degrees Kelvin of some images, you could be way down into the very warm tones, 2,000 or 3,000 degrees Kelvin, or upwards of 10,000 degrees Kelvin. And that's important to realize because it creates a sense of warmth or coolness in your photographs. And you either accept it or you utilize your camera to capture the image you're trying to do based on that color temperature. That's where you have those controls in your cameras, cloudy day, sunny day, incandescent light, that sort of thing. They're trying to, with those tools, to bring everything back to a daylight color quality. Light also can be specular and it can be soft. And of course, it's affected by natural and man-made elements. Let's look at some images down here and talk about some of the natural man-made elements that go into them. Look at the image in the upper right-hand side of the family walking. You can see that there's highlights and shadows. There's a sense of depth in there. That whole scene, what's happening is above their heads and to the right-hand side is trees and foliage. Big, big honking tree above their heads, subtracting all the light from above them. And on the right-hand side, there's a whole wall of trees subtracting light from the right-hand side. So the left-hand side of our image, all it is just big open sky that's coming in to create a main light to illuminate them. The image directly below that's done very close to sunset. That's why we have information in the foreground, middle ground, and you can see the mountains and things in the background. This is in the San Juan Islands in Washington State. But the sun is setting on our right-hand side, and it's right on the horizon line. Just, it's still fully up, but it's just through those diffuse clouds. So we have a strong main light coming in, yet the information in the highlight side and the shadow side is well within the capabilities of the chip. The image on our left-hand side, above the subjects and above the camera position, it's a big canopy of trees and foliage. Behind them and to our right, all it is open sky. So you can even see on her face and on his face, there's a direction of light coming in from the right-hand side as we view the photograph. The image on the upper left, you've got a situation where, again, it's really, really close to sunset. There's information right in the whole scene, foreground, middle ground, and background. There is information through that whole photograph, creating a situation where the chip is capable of capturing everything. Look at the two images down here. The upper left is a little boy. We've got a kicker light on the right-hand side. We've got a main light, and we've got a fill light. Above him is foliage and trees. That's blocking all the overhead light. There's a wall of trees on the left-hand side, and that's why we're getting a little bit of that green cast coming in there, which I hadn't corrected. And, of course, the main light is just an open panel of light on the right-hand side coming in to illuminate the mask of his face. The exact same situation for the little Chinese child on the right-hand side. There's a wall of trees behind the camera position, and to our right, that's coming up and overhanging the child, effectively blocking all the light from that direction. So the light from the left is just open sky that's coming in to illuminate the mask of the face. The right-hand side, Gabriel Alonso and his wife, she's a great photographer from down in Houston area, I think it is. We've got a great compositional situation here, but we've also got a very powerful light situation. To our left and above them is, again, a lot of trees and hillside and rocks and things, which is effectively blocking out all the light from the left-hand side, creating a shadow situation. The area to the right is a large area of open sky coming in to illuminate the subject and create that three-dimensional feeling. The exact same situation of the little child with the bicycles in behind them. Trees over his head and a lot of trees on our left block all the light from those directions, leaving only light coming in from the right-hand side, which is a big open patch of sky filtering through the trees. The image on the upper left, that's really, really close to sunset. The sun's fading down over that water, but it's not gone so far that it's creating too strong of a ratio across the subject's face. And you got a kicker in there. You've got a main light, which is the sky above her, and the shadow side is being created by the fact that there's all of the rockery of these things along the water shoreline that create the shadow side of the face. The secret to finding quality light. Look for trees, look for columns and buildings that you can define a highlight side and a shadow side with a gentle edge transfer. It's one of the key things to finding light outdoors. When you look at a tree, look at the highlight side and the shadow side, and if you see one side of the tree brighter than the other side, okay, and yet there's a gentle transition of light from highlight to shadow, you're going to be able to find really, really cool light that creates a beautiful transition from highlight to shadow if you explore that opportunity. The same can be said for columns or buildings. Look for the highlight side and the shadow side where you can see a gentle edge transfer, and you know that there's an image there that's going to have amazing quality of light that our clients cannot produce. Let's look at an example or two. The image on the right-hand side is a very fun one. Look at the two areas of key importance, well, three, subject inclusive. Above the subject, there's bricks. The right-hand side of the bricks, bright. The left-hand side of the bricks, darker. On the lower left, right-hand side's brighter, left-hand side's darker, but it's not as strong. You can see the ratio down there is more gentle than the ratio above her head. those are the kind of qualities you want to look for to say, hey, I know I can make a really cool photograph in there because it's there naturally. You can create this three-dimensional feeling of highlight to shadow naturally wrapping around the face. The same thing on the photograph on the left-hand side. You can see on those bricks and behind the subject, there's a highlight side and a shadow side. And what I do when I'm wandering around looking for opportunities to make photographs, that's the key that I look for. I look for trees that have that same quality or buildings, and when I see that thing, I'm going like, yeehaw, I know I can make a very strong photograph in there naturally with light that's going to be dramatic and really create a sense of three-dimensionality to our images. Another key opportunity is the exact same thing right in here. This situation in fall colors, we've got all the light above their heads is being blocked by the foliage and the fall colors that is existing. What you can't see on our left-hand side is lots of trees and almost a deeper forested area, which is subtracting all the light from the left-hand side of the photograph. And on the right-hand side, it's just a big open panel of north light that's coming in to wrap around the faces. So we have this natural look to it. It doesn't look flashy. There's no flash involved here. It's just plain, raw, natural light. Yet there's a sense of depth and drama to the light, and our clients can't do this because they don't know how to even look for something like this. They just put a flash on the camera because it looked dark in that area, and they'd pop it off. And that's what a lot of the aspiring professionals are doing, the same thing. They're just going into this deep, dark area of trees, which this was, and saying, oh, I better put a flash gun on, and popping it off, and missing that the real drama that's in here. And this final photograph here was the exposure, if my memory serves me right, was probably a quarter of a second at 5.6 at ISO 400. So it was a fairly low lit area, but it wasn't hard to do. I mean, people can hold still that way, and the dogs, fortunately, were well behaved. A couple of key comments I want to get into now that affected my career as I started to look for light is the next two slides. Number one, don't shoot into the trees, shoot parallel to the tree line. Trees will create a shadow line. Now, picture in your minds, if you will, there's a wall of trees, and the sun is behind the trees, and you've got a subject standing by this wall of trees or these shrubs. Well, they're in open shade, so the light in the face is fairly flat. It doesn't have a lot of sun or specularity from the sun or hot spots, so you can look at that photograph and go, gee, it's nice and clean. We've got a nice gradation of tones on it. There's lots of information in the highlights and shadows. But in reality, it's flat. What I want to encourage you to do is not shoot straight into those trees into your subject, but shoot parallel to that tree line such that the trees are creating a sense of shadow on the subject's face. The other thing I want to do, and I thank Frank Cricchio, who shared this with me so many, many years ago, shoot into the shadow. Short light equals drama. I can't stress this enough. We have broad lighting, we have short lighting, and they both have their time and place to work with. But as a general broad statement, short lit subjects create drama. Our clients, again, have no concept of what that's all about. And the more that you can create situations where there's more drama in your photographs, the more powerful photographs, it creates purchasing value, it creates images that they simply can't create. So let's look at these qualities. Let's take this image on the upper left. There's a whole building, a wall of a building on the right-hand side subtracting all the light. We're shooting parallel to the tree line, if you'll use that thing, but in fact it was a building. And we're shooting such that there's a light coming and wrapping around the face. The gal down on the lower left-hand corner, exactly the same thing. There's a whole area of open sky on our left-hand side and a whole wall of a building on the right-hand side subtracting the light. The center photograph, exactly the same thing. There's an open wall of sky and open clouds and things on the right-hand side, but on our left, we're shooting parallel to a whole row of trees. Exactly the same thing on the lower right and the upper right-hand photographs. There's a whole wall of trees. We're shooting parallel to the tree line and then bringing the face back into that open panel of sky to create that wrap-around feeling with a gentle transition of highlight to shadow. And to reinforce what I'm saying when I say that, this edge transition business, look at the photograph in the lower right-hand corner of the little gal with the dandelion things. You can see there's a main light, there's a kicker, which is the highlights, the specular's longer nose and her left cheek, or as we view it, the left. But look at the shadow that's wrapping around her face, across her cheek. It's a very gentle, gentle, gentle transition. And this is ultimately your target goal in a lot of cases. Whereas you look at the image on the upper left, the transition is a much harder transition from highlight to shadow. But still, there's lots of information contained in that shadow side of the photograph. So pay attention closely to your transition from highlight to shadow. More examples of that. Look at the little girl on the left. We're shooting into the shadow side of the face. There's drama. The little boy, we're shooting into the shadow side of the face. The gentleman on the upper right, we're shooting into the shadow side of the face. It's creating a sense of drama to our images. More examples of that. That little girl again, and just a little different twist to it. The young man on the left. There's a sense of drama to the photograph in a profile situation. There's a main light coming in. You can see the rim lighting on it. There's lots of information from the shadow side of the face. And ultimately, there's foliage and trees above his head. Of course, his hat helps as well. And there's a wall of building along our right-hand side as we look at him, and behind my camera position, creating the shadow side to his face. Next, we're going to move into things, light overcast days. Light overcast days are great days to work on outdoors. It's like a big softbox. There's great background control, clean color temperature. Those images look something like this. You can notice we have information, foreground, middle ground, and background, and the information on our subjects is still very, very strong. They're great days to work on, real pretty easy days to work on. Heavy overcast days, however, are tough. There's very, very limited direction of light. There's limited specularity or luminosity to the light. And more times out of 10, when you've got a heavy overcast days, the eyes are blocked up, and that's very, very dangerous. In situations like that, you pretty much have to go to relationship images, such as this, where they're interacting with each other or with a subject. The other thing that pretty much has to be done on an overcast day or heavy overcast day is you're going to have to work with electronic flash. Reflectors simply won't cut it because there's nothing for it to bounce back up unless it's a tight close-up to get into the mask of the face. So flash is essential on these kind of days. That image, by the way, pouring rain when we made that photograph. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself. You can see the old raindrops on the water as that we're around on the dog when he's swimming into the shoreline. We managed to get only 5 or 6 exposures off before everybody was absolutely drenching. You see it in Mom's hair right now too. But I'm never afraid to push the envelope, and we did a whole series of photographs outdoors in the fall colors, which is what Mom wanted. But we could see a storm coming across the Straits of Georgia, and Dad really wanted this concept. And the storm hit, started pouring. They're all under the edge of the trees and the foliage with me. And I said, "You got any golf umbrellas?" "Yep." "Okay, I got one too. Let me put it on my camera." I went and got things set up. They all stayed dry with the golf umbrellas. And I went out and marked exactly where I wanted their feet with little twigs and so forth, and came back. I mean, I was absolutely drenched when I made the photograph, and I just yelled at them on the count of 3, throw that stick and come down into your position and start calling your dog. We got 4 or 5 photographs together, but it's their favorite photograph by a long shot because it captures the spirit of their family and what they love to do together as a family. And it's a pouring, raining day. Time of day that you can make photographs. Boy, oh boy. Morning and evening are the 2 times a day of preferred by most portrait photographers. Midday, and I'm talking on a sunny day here. A midday is that's a day you should either be golfing or working in Photoshop or reading a book. And unless it's a situation where it's a 50th anniversary and they're having a luncheon at the yacht club and you have no choice, midday should be avoided on a sunny day. And those kind of situations, for all practical intents, you have to use electronic flash unless you are really good with working with reflectors and have some big reflectors. However, the morning and evening light is amazing. Morning light is directional, has a warmer color temperature. The subject and background are kind of balanced. There's information in both those areas, but you have a very narrow window of working time. A couple of examples in the seminar I worked on in Puerto Vallarta one year. Early morning light, very, very playful, fun to work with, but it's a narrow, narrow window of working light. These 3 images down in here, when I was teaching at Texas school, very narrow window of working light, but you would never get that fog off the water, the mist off the water in the middle of the afternoon or even in the evening, yet it creates a sense of drama, and it's the kind of images that our clients wouldn't even dream of doing, and that's ultimately our goal today because our clients are using the same gear we are. We have to create photographs that they can't do, which means we have to understand composition, as we related for in some previous workshops of collages, or utilizing light to create a sense of drama in the photograph. The photograph on the upper left-hand side is it was like maybe a 3-second exposure, if my memory, 3 or 4 second exposure at wide open. That was film days on a scan. And that's pretty daring, and they can hold together for that long a period of time. It's not hard to do. So morning is sweet. Another example, morning, this is an old scan, and I'm sorry about the quality, but I forgot to replace it in the slideshow. 1 second at f6.3. It's also a great diptych opportunity, which we talked about in a previous workshop. This is early morning light. The sun is just trying to come over the horizon line of the city, which is on our right-hand side. This is where I live in Vancouver. Evening light is very realistic to be able to use for clients. The morning light, you're not going to get a lot of clients getting up at sunrise at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and going out and playing, but the evening you will. It's an amazing quality of light. It's directional. It's got a nice warm color temperature. The light is low on the horizon line, so it can sculpt and shape your backgrounds. When the sun gets right down on the horizon line, you can work, looking right into it in your eyes without any problems. You've got quite a long window of working time, and you've got great control of your subject and your background. Look at some examples over here. The young man on the right-hand corner down here, his name is Jorge Velasco, great young photographer in Mexico. I think we're going to be hearing some great things from him in the future. But look at the quality of light. The sun's right down on the horizon line. There's just a little bit of misty clouds around there. But look at the quality of illumination on his face and the quality of illumination on the background. The value of light hitting his face is the same as the value of light hitting the background, so everything is within the capabilities of the chip. The image on the lower left-hand side, the exact same thing here. The light is right down on the horizon line, so the value of illumination of the subject is the same as the value of illumination on the background. Everything is within the capability of the chip. The image on the upper left, up in the Cliffs by White Cliff area, the foreground, middle ground, background is all receiving for all practice the same amount of illumination. This photograph does have a very weak amount of flash being popped into it because they are, for all practical intents, they're backlit, but it was so overcast and light misty kind of overcast that the value of illumination across the whole scene was very similar. More examples of those in there too. The image in the upper left, again looking right back to the Vancouver skyline. The subject is, or the sun is right down on the horizon line. I mean, it's right just disappearing, and they're looking straight into that setting sun, yet there's a lot of drama, and the value of illumination on the subject is the same as the value of illumination on the city in the background. Image on the upper right, the sun's tweaking right down onto the horizon line, getting really nice and low. I mean, if 10 minutes from that point of view, when I made that photograph, it really would have been, for all practical, dark out. You wouldn't be able to make any more photographs. And it's right at that last little window of time where the light is so sweet, again, because the value of illumination on the subjects is the same as the value of illumination in the backgrounds, and you're holding information through that whole scene. The photograph in the lower right-hand corner down in here, the exact same scenario. The sun's getting right down on the horizon line. It's coming right into him. It's so low on the horizon line that you're looking straight into it, and it's not that real hard, contrasty, 5-stop difference between highlights to shadows. And the same value of illumination's on the background, so everything's within the capability of the chip. More examples up in here. The North Dakota photograph up in the upper left-hand side, the sun's just tweaking down to the horizon line. Upper right in the Vancouver shoreline there, looking to the North Shore, the sun's right down on that horizon line, and we're getting the value of illumination equal right across the whole scene. The same in the photograph in the lower center down there with Mount Baker in the background. Window light is something I want to chat briefly about here. I can say with clarity that, as I started to get into my career a long time ago, going to lots of seminars, and you walk away from the seminar and go like, oh, I forgot a lot of that. I know it all now. I learned a lot. But it wasn't until I took a workshop from somebody that all about window light that I really felt I actually started to see light and see directional light and understand it. Window light is one of the most amazing qualities of light. I mean, my whole front of my studio, which is technically a warehouse with a big garage door, I use for window light portraits constantly. I'm moving the furniture around out in the lobby area because the light is just, it's sweet. The key is what you see with window light is what you actually get. The other key part about window light is that, you're usually in a room, so the overhead is blocked, one side is blocked with the other walls of the living room, so you got this open panel of light coming in from the window, just as I've been describing with trees and foliage. It often requires fill. It often requires use of a reflector, bounce flash, or a little wink light to open up the eyes. You want to avoid direct sunlight through a window. You want to be careful, very careful, of balancing the sources. In a room, you could have a lot of ambient light, which is usually incandescent, sometimes fluorescent. That's dangerous. You do not want to contaminate the skin with those areas, and you want to avoid the green reflections that sometimes can come in off of reflections off of grass through the window, and you'll see that in the underside, under the chin, under the eyes, like where the bags are on the eyes, under the nose. You'll see sometimes green reflections if you have that issue. Looking at some examples of window lighting here. Look at the drama in these photographs. The lower right-hand photograph, tremendous drama on this girl's face, purely window light. Look at the soft wraparound lighting on the image on the left of this gal that was in Colorado to workshop in a hotel. Look at these three examples, which are even more dramatic. The bridal on the left-hand side, window light coming in to illuminate the mask of her face. the gal in the lower center, window light. Look at the drama in that window light. The light is wrapping around the face. There's beautiful highlights, shadows. There's great edge transfers. On the right-hand side, the same thing, that window light's coming in to illuminate our subject and create a very dramatic quality of light. It is, without question, one of the more powerful ways to make photographs. The power of reflectors. Reflectors are so cool to work with. Look at these three examples in here of how you can use reflectors, not flash gun. I'm talking reflectors. I'm talking the 48-inch or 54-inch round chameleons, or the 5-in-1 type of reflectors, and this is the silvered side of it, where they are, in all three of these photographs, the subjects are basically in a deep, dark, shrouded area of trees or buildings or whatever, where there's no drama to the light on the face, and we just take a simple reflector, catch some of that light, and bounce it back into their faces. The lower right photograph, I mean, it was just her face. As you look at it, the left-hand side of the face is very dark in shadow. Before we made the photograph and out of the reflector, the right-hand side was exactly the same. It was just dark, muddy, and flat. We took that reflector, caught some of that sun, wiggled it, and bounced it back into her face, and voila, we've got a really much more powerful photograph. And the exact same scenario on the other two photographs. We took that reflector to catch some of that light, bounce it back into the face to create a sense of drama, which the clients can't do. The two photographs in here, again, the girl on the left, backlit. Her face was basically all in shadow. It wasn't muddy so much, but it was basically dark and in shadow. There was no wraparound lighting. There's no sense of drama or highlight to ratio. We simply took that reflector, bent it around a little bit, wiggled it around a little bit, feathered it back into her face from the same side that the main light, this backlight, was coming in to hit her hair, wrapped it around her face so it looked like a natural wraparound light. The exact same happening in the photograph in the lower right-hand side. If you look on the shadow side of her face, her whole face looked like that kind of a tone, kind of muddy and dark, before we added the reflector to pop in there and create that sense of drama. The right-hand side, the gal's backlit, we caught that reflector, popped that and bent it, tweaked it, bent it. Oh, there it is. There's the light coming in to illuminate the mask of the face. The exact same scenario on the other two photographs. The one in the center top, the girl is backlit. She's in the middle of a hard sunny day. This is like right around 12 noon, or no, it's right after lunch actually, like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Hard sunny day, water bouncing off that background. Her face was in deep shadow, like really, really dark, deep shadow. We took that reflector, we bounced it back into her face, we caught some of that sunlight, and look at the luminosity to her face. The same with the image on the left-hand side. We got great luminosity to her face, and the light has got some structure to it rather than being flat and boring. The image of this gentleman here with his motorcycle, backlit, his face was in deep, dark shadow. We took a silver reflector, it was probably 30 feet away, caught that sunlight, popped it back into his face, and we've got, again, a dramatic photograph. We've got the same situation happening down in here. With that backlight, we're using that reflector to pop it back into the face to create a sense of drama to the girl's face. Ken Whitmire, great photographer friend of mine from Yakima. He's in a deep canyon. This is called Kaikesh Creek, way up the coast here when we were photographing killer whales. And the canyon's probably 100, 150 feet deep, and tall Douglas fir trees on top of that. There's light coming straight down above him. His whole face looked like the left-hand side of his face as we look at the photograph now. That's what his whole panel of his face looked like until we took that reflector, caught some of that sun and that bright light coming down straight down into that canyon, wiggled it around, bent it and twisted until we had a great light pattern coming in to illuminate the mask of his face. Image on the left-hand side, main light's coming in and wrapping around her face, that's good, but all her hair light that's coming there, that's a reflector. We caught some sun from behind her to our right and popped it back in to highlight her hair to give a little bit of drama. The image on the upper right-hand side in here, we're using reflectors and literally catching light and bouncing light from one reflector to another reflector to come in to illuminate the mask of his face, because he's sitting down, he's at some stairs in an old building, and there's trees and foliage all in front of him and all around him. I mean, it was just a real nasty, dark, nasty-looking kind of an area until we used reflector to bounce from one light to another light to pop back into his face. More reflector examples here, just showing the strength and power of reflectors. Upper right-hand or left-hand side, backlit, early morning light. This is down Puerto Vallarta. The soft light reflectors catching that light and wrapping it around her face. And because it's early morning light, we've got this soft warmth to it. The image on the right-hand side, when she's backlit, her face was in deep shadow until we took an efficient reflector, which was a silvered one, caught some of that light, and popped it back into her face. The same going on in this photograph here. She was in an area of shrouded trees in this little creek, and there was no illumination coming into her. So we again took a nice big reflector. In this case, it was a big Larson 3x6 or 4x6, whatever the big Larson one is, silver. Caught some light with it, popped it back in her face. We've got a brand new photograph. These two photographs here, even group photographs, can be handled with reflectors. The lower left-hand side in here, backlit, a set of 3 kids. Their faces were in deep, dark shadow. We took a large Larson reflector, which I think are very good reflectors, caught that sunlight there, feathered it back into the face, metered it, and made a photograph. On the upper right-hand photograph, we literally backlight situation of the people walking in the vineyard with their dogs, and my assistant is holding a big Larson reflector and walking backwards and just catching that sunlight as I'm constantly making photographs, because that's what you're doing on a walking in relationship images. You're making photograph after photograph after photograph. So he's working with me to bounce that light into. Did I have to Photoshop him out afterwards? Yes, because he was in the photograph. He was, on the left-hand side, roughly where that reflector is, maybe a little more to the left. But I just shopped him out afterwards. But look at the quality of light I was able to achieve with a reflector on their faces. Subtractive things are also quite important, where you have black reflectors, jackets, drapings, whatever. Very, very useful. The photograph on the left, without the black reflector above her head, subtracting, there was all sorts of spotty light hitting her hair, hitting her chest, hitting the rocks, everything. I just subtracted it all out with a big black circular reflector, which is the Chameleon or 5-in-1, and we've got a nice pattern of light in the face. I used a black reflector on the image on the right-hand side to subtract light coming in from the right-hand side to create a sense of drama or wraparound light on the girl's face. Now, in our last closing minutes in here, I want to move into flash, because this is where everybody right now is dancing with this off-camera flash thing. And do we have to use flash? Yes, it's a great tool, but I really, really, really want to make my point. Why are you adding flash? What are you trying to achieve? I see so many photographers reach into their camera bag, before they even, look at a scene or trying to decide what they're doing, and putting a flash on their camera. I think it's a sense of security that they might even be looking at, as their photographs tend to turn out, sort of. And that's where we've got to stand well above that and make ourselves make a decision as to what we're trying to do. Why are we adding that flash gun on our cameras, and what are we trying to achieve with that flash gun? So having said that, there's 3 things to pay attention to. Number 1, you're going to use a flash to create a main light. You can use a flash to create a fill light or to clean up the faces, or you can use a flash to create an accent lighting, as in a backlight. If you're going to put a flash gun on your camera, it's one of those 3 things: to create a main light, a fill light or to clean up the faces, or an accent light. Consider the direction of the flash as it relates to the natural conditions. Consider the quality of the flash as it relates to the natural conditions. When I say quality, do you want to have this flash gun added to your photograph, just the straight flash gun, as you take it out of the box in your camera case, or do you want to put a modifier of some sort on there, a little scrim, a little bounce situation? I was creating a photograph last week, which I should have added to this slideshow, of the Commodore for the Royal Vancouver Yacht Club, the incoming Commodore. And my assistant and I were out on the deck of the club looking back towards the city, and he is, open sun. It's just hard open sunlight, but it's side lit, half back, half side lit into his face. So the ratio was very strong. Well, we took a 3x6, 4x6 big Larson reflector, silvered, and I used that like an umbrella almost. I popped a flash gun into that, bouncing back into his face, and the image has a wonderful quality of light. We've got a backlight. There's lots of drama to it. The reflector flash combination was creating a main light to come to wrap around his face, and it's a powerful image, a very powerful image. Types of flash: you've got straight on-camera flash. You can have a fill or a bounce flash situation. You can also work with an open, what we call bare tube, which is getting away from the kind of Canon, Nikon flash guns we have and going into the Lumidynes, the Sunpacks, the ones that have the flash tubes, the rounder tubes. We also have a lot of the mini soft boxes, the smaller portable soft boxes like Doug Box's box. Doug Box is a great photographer from down in Texas, has a fabulous portable soft box, and it's actually probably the most efficient one that I am aware of. I use mine all the time. It's great. And of course, we can use umbrellas outdoors as well. Now, getting into how to use flash outdoors, essentially, if the intensity of the flash gun is greater than the ambient, you're going to see flash. Your image is going to look like they've been exposed with flash. They're great to control sunny day situations, hard backlit situations. I'm going to repeat myself. If the intensity of the flash gun is greater than the ambient light, the image is going to look flashy. And here's where that handheld meter comes into play. You can actually meter the intensity of the flash gun, meter the intensity of the ambient, and make a decision. And one of the beautiful things about our flash guns, or our meters, especially the Sekonic meters and the old Minolta meters, is it will give you the output of your flash gun in a percentage of the net exposure. Remember, light is accumulative. So when you add a flash gun to a scene, you are accumulating the total light, and those meters will tell you that your flash is coming in at and contributing 10%, 50%, 80% of the total net exposure. And I'll explain more about that in the next few slides. If the intensity of the flash is less than the ambient, now we're starting to get into a fill flash situation. It should not really be noticeable. It's great for opening eyes up in groups. It can help reduce the green reflections, and it can reduce a strong ratio, i.e. a flash situation. So if the intensity of the flash is less than the ambient light, okay, then you've got a situation where it's a fill quality of light. Hopefully somebody will get that phone. Here we have a situation of an image that was made down in a canyon, backlit, early morning light. We're adding light to the photograph to support or make a fill light situation. You know, the actual exposure was of the scene was probably 15th a second at 4 or 5.6 because it's early morning, and we brought a big umbrella in to illuminate the faces because they were probably 3 to 4 stops less than what's going on in the scene. Situation here, it's raining heavily. The camera's covered. I'm using a Doug box on the camera right. It's very heavy overcast. They've all got umbrellas over their heads to start with. They're all sitting on green plastic bags with leaves covering the green plastic bags. I'm bringing in that softbox to basically open up the faces. I don't want to create a heavy main light here because it wouldn't look right, because the whole scene is so soft. This is heavy overcast, rainy kind of a day. And literally what we did at the very, very, very last minute, you know, is everything all set, I've metered, I've done my work, and I said, okay, let's pitch the umbrellas. 1, 2, 3, pitch your umbrellas, and we made our exposures, you know, in probably less than a minute. Here we have a situation where very heavy overcast, the eyes are blocked up. The flash contributions to add luminosity and light to the face, or light to the face, not kind of a directional light, because a directional light wouldn't look right. It wouldn't look really good to have a main light coming in here, you know, and creating a strong 3-to-1 ratio, because the whole scene doesn't look like that. The whole scene has this soft pastoral kind of feeling, but the faces were muddy and blocked up. So the flash gun in this case is, for all practical purposes, right beside the camera, just to add some luminosity and life to the faces. In this situation here, and again, there's a pixelated slide from one I hadn't changed from the slideshow. It's light rain, misty rain, way up by the lake, and you know the faces are all blocked up. So we're using the main in this case to open up the faces, and it's coming in at roughly a half a stop greater than the ambient light. Here, it's very, very late. The sun has been down for quite a while. I had a challenge from somebody, too dark to make a photograph. No, it isn't. We took those chameleon parabolic reflectors, popped out the translucent center panel, put a flash gun on one side of it, and shot the flash gun through it, open up the massacre face, dropped our shutter speed down to pick up the rest of the scene. Here's some more uses of it as a main light outdoors. This is a seminar we did in New England last spring. We've got a day that's puts the illumination on the mask of his face on his main light side, shall we say, was the same as the shadow side of his face. We brought that flash gun in to create a main light to create the drama of the scene. We've got a situation here. They're in the middle of a sunny, sunny, sunny day. Lots of drama to the clouds and things. I wanted to record that. So we're bringing in 2 flash guns, a main and a fill. They're being handheld. One's being handheld, one's on a stand. And the main light is approximately 1 stop greater than the fill light. And all these are the little, you know, Canon flash guns, the 580 flash guns. There's nothing more than that. Just those 2 portable flash guns triggered by pocket wizards in this case. A situation, this one here, we did this just to show that we can make a photograph. They're on a deck, hard sunlight, the middle of this is 12 noon, right in the middle of a sunny day. You know, the sun's a little bit brighter on the right-hand side that's coming in. All I did was repeat it, that sunlight that's coming in with flash guns the ambient was 125 at f16, so it's ISO 100, Sunny 16. There's a 3 to 4 stop difference between them. Brought the flash in on manual, and I use my flash on manual, by the way, almost 100%. I do not use TTL flash guns. I don't find them to be consistent enough for the kind of shooting that I do. So I always use manual, hence I've also got to use the meters and the percentage of output. Another quick example of it, I want to get into one last thing here too before we wind up our hour. Learn your math. The flash contribution as a percentage of the net exposure, because light is accumulative. Choose your goal, the mood of the light and the quality of the light, and then use your meter to determine the percentage of contribution of flash to the net exposure. And by all means, learn to trust your meters. They are really smart. I'm going to skip this here. I want to go through these 4 or 5 slides. The upper left-hand photograph is our reference in all of these images. If you look at the image in the lower right, I'm bringing a flash gun in, and it's contributing 20% to the exposure. Where the 20% come from is a reading literally off of the or the Sekonic meter. You take your meter reading, and it will tell you that the net exposure is the 60th second at f4 and 2/10 in this case, and it will say on that face of that meter, if you're the right kind of meter, which the Sekonics all do that, it's contributing 20% to the exposure. Now, if we look at these 2 photographs, it's pretty hard to see any contribution. I mean, you can see a tiny little bit, maybe on her fingertips on the lower right-hand photograph, and maybe a little bit to the shadow side of her face, but it's hardly doing anything at all at 20%. But now look what's happening. The photograph is being lit by flash again. It's saying it's 40%. It's only adding another 2/10 to the exposure, but it's now 40%. And now look what you're starting to see. Look at her nose and to the side of her nose. That shadow is a very, very slight bit stronger, isn't it? The specular highlight in her eye is a little bit stronger. The shadow under her chin is a little bit stronger. And this is 40% contribution to the net exposure. Now look what's happening at 50%. We've jumped up a full stop to 65.6. 50%, look at the nose shadow, look at the chin shadow. It's starting, you're starting to see flash exposure to this photograph. At 80%, whoa boy, we've got a strong flash exposure in here. Look at the nose shadow, look at the chin shadow. It's much, much, much stronger, and we're seeing a strong contribution of flash at 80%. And if we go to 100%, where the meter says, your photograph is being exposed by flash, it's 100% of the exposure that meter is recommending is contributed to by the flash. And strong specular highlight in the eye, strong nose shadow, strong under the chin shadow. These slides, I'm just going to back up real quick and cover them again. Hopefully, Kevin, we can run a little overboard. 20%, hardly anything. 40%, aha, we're starting to see a little bit of flash. 50%, yep, I'm seeing some flash, but not a lot. 80%, starting to really, really see flash control for this. And at 100%, hey baby, this is a flash photograph. Now why do I share this with you? This type of a knowledge that the meter gives you helps you make a decision of what you want to do to contribute flash to your exposure. If you want to create a photograph outdoors that you want to see a tremendous amount of drama to the main light as it relates to the scene, what kind of percentage contribution are you going to be looking for? Clearly 100% or 80%, because it is a very dramatic light. Whereas if you're outdoors and you say to yourself, oh, the face is just a little bit muddy, I'd love maybe just a little bit of a main light coming in. I just want to get a little luminosity to the skin tone because it just has that muddy sort of feeling to it. Then I'm going to bring flash in, but I really probably don't need any more than maybe 30 or 40% contribution to the net exposure. And this is, again, where you need to trust your meter. Look at this photograph. I know this is hard for you to see because this is a subtle difference, but if you look at the photograph in the lower right versus the photograph in the upper left, look at the shadow right down by the young man's hands and his knee and sock. On the lower right, it's a very gentle amount. That's 40%. The one on the upper left is 60%. It's starting to see a little bit more of a stronger flash contribution. The whole concept here is that you can control how the photograph looks with the knowledge of what the flash is contributing to the photograph. The left-hand photograph in here, the flash gun's coming in, it's coming in fairly weak. The one on the right-hand side, you can see it's coming in much stronger. So what would the percentage of flash to these two photographs be? The one on the left is probably down to like 20 or 30% at the most, because I really don't see any hard edge transfer to the flash. You know, it's raining out, a lightly heavy overcast day with some fog all around, but we've got some luminosity back on the young lad's face. On the image on the right, it's probably coming in more like 50 or 60% because I can see edge transfer. I can see a direction of light. And one of the things I love to do is analyze photographs like this because it'll help me make that decision when I'm out in the field making photographs. These two images in here, the image on the left, there's no flash. The faces are muddy. The flash is coming in. Now the faces are illuminated, and we have strong luminosity to the faces rather than that muddy look. The image on the right with the flash contribution, what do you think the contribution is? What is your educated guess? It's probably coming in at around 50 or 60% because we're starting to see a little bit of direction to the light, and it definitely has picked it up, but it isn't coming in at 80 or 100% because there's really no strong edge transfer to light. There's no strong main light coming in to pound into their faces. In this situation down in here, I don't see a real strong main light coming in. You know, there's nice control, there's luminosity faces, but it doesn't look like that one photograph I showed you at 100%. So this is probably coming in at 50 or 60% because clearly it does have flash contribution. Important knowledge to find. I want to do a couple little exercises in here as we move through these last few slides. The image on the left, it's strongly backlit, it's sunlit. The natural exposure to this is a 250 to the second at 9.6 if I were to meter the overall scene in the background. Not metering the hot center where the sun is, but the clouds all around that scene was 250 to the second at 9.6. So that was halfway between 8 and 11. We brought flash in. We feathered the flash so it was illuminated, letting the subject, Elizabeth's bridal portrait we did for her many years ago, and the flash was reading f11.5. What is the final exposure? You need to learn that light is accumulative. Again, I said that many times, and there is a relationship between shutter speed and exposure, and there's a relationship between flash and aperture. Flash and aperture are linked. They cannot be changed. Flash controls the aperture, so we needed to set the aperture at 11.5. If we set the aperture at any other setting, it would then be over or underexposing the subject because the flash is illuminating the subject. The shutter speed, however, is controlling the background. So in this situation here, if we were able to, assuming we were able to, and in the old days with the different kinds of shutters we had, we could do this. Now you've got limitations to your shutter speed. But if we took the exposure up to a 500th of a second at 11.5, because the aperture is 11.5, that's what flash said, then the background would get darker. If we took the shutter speed down to a 30th of a second, the subject would remain the same because it's being exposed by the flash for all practical intents, but the background would go light and blown out. It would be very, very airy feeling. A good example of how we do this flash stuff outdoors, we're using a softbox. We're illuminating the subject to create some luminosity to the faces because it is pretty much an overcast, blocked up day. Reflector down in here, catching light from above. I'm going to move through some of these images a little bit quicker, except for this one. This is an interesting image. The actual exposure on this photograph, this is going to slay you. The actual exposure on this photograph was 20 seconds at f8. The room is completely dark when I start the exposure. I'm not using the modeling light on the flash gun. It's an umbrella, an old Portamaster. I metered it to f8 for the subject. That was a choice of aperture that I wanted. I metered the monitors, which are very old monitors, and they set an exposure of like 10 seconds to get any information on there because they're so dim, the old monitors. I assumed, took a sophisticated wild-ass guess, a swag, so to speak, that for reciprocity, and I chose 20 seconds, which was a guess, but it was a good one. The same in the backgrounds. This is a big room that we're in, a big office area. There's pot lights all around the very edge illuminating the maps, and I metered those, and at f8 they were like 5-6 seconds. I took a sophisticated swag, sophisticated wild-ass guess, and it said 10 seconds, what I figured it should be. So all the lights off in the room. I tell the subject to look at me. I trigger the camera on bulb. The flash exposes him at f8. He's still in total darkness. He can actually move around, not much, but he could move around if he wanted to. During the first 10 seconds of exposure, the monitors are burning into my film. The camera obviously is tripod mounted, and after 10 seconds or so, I told his executive assistant to turn on the pot lights in the room. None of the pot lights were contaminating him. They were shining on the maps in the background. And after 10 seconds, or the full 20 seconds, bingo, we've got our photograph. This is an example of bare tube lighting for the photograph. Look at the quality of the illumination on the faces. Bare tube really is a very cool light source. And of course, you drag the shutter down to f8 or to 15th of a second after it's f8 because flash is exposing the subject, and we're able to pick up the fireplace in the background. A couple more examples of electronic flash outdoors in here, where we're working in a situation where the flash is illuminating the subjects on the left-hand side. They're in a deep, dark area of shroud of trees. There's no luminosity getting to their faces at all. So we brought the flash gun in to illuminate the mask of their faces in a softly lit way so it was consistent with the concept of the photograph. The image on the right-hand side, quite different. We made a main light out of that flash to illuminate the subject's face. A couple of quick examples here of utilizing flash indoors. This is where we drag the shutter. The photograph on the left, all three photographs are illuminated by flash the same way. The aperture remained the same because the flash and aperture are married. They're joined at the hip. They cannot be separated. And the shutter speed is used to control the background. Upper left, 60th of a second. Middle, 15th of a second. Right-hand corner, 1/4 of a second. And you can see how the subjects really haven't changed, but the background has by dragging the shutter. Another example of remote flash outdoors, backlit sun on the bride's veil and so forth. The flash is contributing roughly 50% because their face is in shadow. So we've got a very gentle suggestion of a main light coming in. More examples of dragging the shutter. The left-hand side is 1/4 of a second at 5.6. Middle 30. The right-hand side 200th of a second at 5.6. 5.6 is the flash exposure. Okay. That's what we have to set our camera or aperture to. And you can see in the right-hand one, it's starting at that point in time to pick up some of the ambient light and open up the shadows just a little bit. Backlighting clients do love backlighting. Use a flash or reflector for subject control. Then use your shutter speed if you're using flash to control your background. Always separate the subject with a dark background. Forget the second line for this workshop in here. The key thing is always separate your subject with a darker background if you're using backlighting. Look at this photograph down here. I didn't do that. Okay, the heads are basically lost in that bright area of the grass and in the sky behind. Whereas in this image, the heads are separated by a darker area. We're seeing the drama of the light coming in. We're seeing the drama of the backlight by separating the heads with the railing that's in the background. I think I'm going to call it from there for this workshop because I know I've run a few minutes overboard now. Kevin, are you with me?
I am here.
Great.
So I do have a couple questions coming through. Where do you meter when you're shooting into the shadows?
Okay, that's a super question, whoever's asked that one too. I base my exposure on the main light that's coming in to illuminate the mask of the face. So in other words, I'm pointing my flash gun, or my light meter I should say, at my main light. Okay. That is also why I use a flat disc. Then I'm also going to meter that subject. I'm going to take that meter because it's a flat disc, and I'm going to take it to the shadow side. Okay, I'm going to trigger all the lights or just meter the scene and take a meter reading of the shadow side of the face and compare it to the highlight side. So if I have a situation now where the main light that's coming in to illuminate the main mask of the face, my main light is 1/30 of a second at f8, and my shadow side is 1/30 of a second at f2.8, hey baby, I got a 3-stop ratio. That's pretty strong. I don't think that's going to work for this scene, so now I need to add a reflector or flash in to illuminate the shadow side of the face or somehow diffuse the main light that's coming in from the highlight side. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, excellent. That was actually the only question that I really had that I wasn't able to type in. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to change the screen back over to my side.
As you're doing that, I'm going to add another comment or two in there too. What I'm going to say is that one of the things I really, really appreciate about you and you, Dad, and Collage is that they're not just out there trying to run a business and supply product to us as photographers. They're also helping us make better photographs through these kind of workshops that you guys are doing. So I really want to thank Collages a great deal for what you're doing. I also want to say that if anybody out there has got any additional questions, by all means, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm deeply involved with PPBay and education, and this is one of the passions I have, and I usually spend a lot of my mornings first thing I do when I come in the morning is I answer a lot of emails and things. And if you've got a question, send me the image. My email address is very simple. It's, I'll give you two of them, Don at MacGregor Studios, MacGregorstudios.com. And that'll get to me. I check my spam mail and things for these kind of questions on a pretty regular basis. The other email address you can get me at is dmacgregor@ppa.com. That's dmacgregor@ppa.com. That will also get to me, and I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions on lighting or, and the key thing is to send a photograph that you've done so that I can see what you've done and try and give you some intelligent answers to some of your questions. And away we go. Again, Kevin, thank you so very, very much for the privilege of working with you all.
No problem, no problem. We're always happy to have you because we definitely have some great topics to talk about. I also wanted to let everyone know that if you missed any of the webinar, or if you came in late, don't worry. I am recording the webinar right now, so that there will be a recorded version available on the blog later. So if you missed anything, or if you forgot to write something down, you can always go back and watch this on the blog. And also, just wanted to touch on a quick product that collages.net has recently launched. One that is actually very geared towards a lot of portrait photography and a lot of family portraits. It is now our story blocks. Basically, we just released the story blocks a few weeks ago, and the difference between our story blocks as opposed to other vendors' products that you see out there is that our blocks, from you see in the image, are actually interchangeable. So if you need to, at any time, update someone's or update a family block, you need to update one of the images on there, the story block is actually a great way to get your customers to come back into the studio so that you can upsell them again on another portrait session. Maybe you do it around the holidays. You'll take their family portrait for their holiday cards and take their holiday card business. But the story block is really geared to help get customers back into your studio, to help keep them as repeating customers and returning customers, which I'm sure, Don, you know about repeating customers, or customers that you keep for life are definitely the best customers, because you always have new stuff for them, and it's that just works out the best. And then one cool thing, or I shouldn't say one cool thing, but another great feature of this story blocks is that they ship in 2 business days. So if you're on a tight turnaround time and you really need to get an excellent product to your customers, the 2-day turnaround really helps get this to your customers quickly if you're in a time crunch. And you can check them out by downloading Rose at collages.net/Rose. And in Rose, you'll see more sizes and templates available than what you see in this picture. But in there, you'll be able to choose from different layouts, the amount of blocks that are on your board. And it will also, in the next couple weeks, you'll see some new sizes and new pricing coming out, as we haven't released all of the sizes yet. So keep an eye out for them in Rose. And with that being said, if you have any questions, you can always email me at webinar@collages.net. I am also going to carbon copy Don on our follow-up email. So if you do have any questions specifically for him, feel free to ask him. But if you have any questions, you can always ask me as well. And for attending today's webinar, you have 2 discounts or 2 coupon codes you can take advantage of. You can take advantage of a one-time 30% off your first story block order. It's for a studio sample. If you need to get a story block in your studio, feel free to use the coupon code SB discount. And also 24 free cards. Pretty self-explanatory. You buy 24 cards, you get 24 free with this coupon code, and that is also just a one-time offer on the first time you use it. If you have any questions, you can always contact customer service at 877-638-7468. And before we go, Don, was there anything else you wanted to add in?
No, I think everything's going real well today. And again, I thank you so much for the opportunity of being involved in things, and hopefully we can help people make better photographs and do better in their businesses.
All right, excellent. Thank you again so much, Don. Thanks again for all the great detail and all of the information you just shared. And
I've got one little thing I've got one little thing if I can Kevin, that I think that I'll throw in here too. Something that as we get into this fall season, things which is great. Hopefully people are got some good business going on. But come the new year, There's going to be a great program, which is Imaging USA. It's being held in New Orleans. I know Collages is always there supporting the program. It is a great convention for those of you out there that have never been to an Imaging USA. It sets itself apart from a lot of the big conventions because it is a much more of a professional level of speakers. I've been on speaker selection for a number of years and sharing it again this next year. It's a great program. It's January the 15, 16, 17. You can go to ppa.com and get a lot of the information for Imaging USA. Great convention. I know we'll see you down there, Kevin.
Yes,
as we always do.
And Don, just to reiterate, are you you are speaking at Imaging?
No, actually I'm on speaker sections. I'm not speaking. I've got a lot of other responsibilities as a board member for PPA. But I'll be there during the whole week, and there's a lot of pre-convention programs which are very good programs, and there are a lot of those are the hands-on kind of programs, whereas the programs on the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday are platform programs. The speakers are chosen very carefully for their ability to convey information, for their ability to share their real knowledge rather than just what we call a platform dance. We don't like that too much. So for those of you that have any interest in that at all, great program to go to, Imaging USA, middle of January. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks a lot, Don, and I hope everyone has an excellent day. Talk to you soon.
Bye, y'all.